Operation Red Harvest. The cool, dry winds sweeping across the Rio Grande carried an invisible menace, a silent storm far more lethal than any military incursion. It began in secret, thousands of miles away, in an underground biolab near Wuhan. There, elite Chinese scientists, in collaboration with rogue American deep state actors, developed a series of superbugs with horrifying potential. The plan was not to ignite war with weapons of mass destruction, but with microscopic pathogens, silent killers, unleashed through a team of expendable operatives. The genesis of the plan. The covert operation, known internally as Operation Red Harvest, had two objectives. For the Chinese, it was an opportunity to destabilize the United States by overwhelming its healthcare system and creating chaos in the heart of its infrastructure. For the American deep state actors, shadowy figures entrenched in intelligence agencies, it was a chance to force political reforms by weakening state governments, allowing globalist policies to take control under the guise of managing a national emergency. The agents in the joint operation designed genetically modified pathogens, variants of viruses that could both kill and remain dormant for years, infecting hosts without symptoms until it was too late. The brilliance of the plan was in the deployment strategy. Human weapons carrying the pathogens across U.S. borders undetected. These mules were 12 individuals, a mix of Chinese nationals, cartel operatives, and radicalized Americans recruited from extremist movements. Each was trained to act as both a vector and a decoy, moving discreetly through migrant caravans, safe houses, and border checkpoints to deliver their lethal cargo deep into American soil. The Infiltration. The 12-person squad, known internally as Vanguard Unit 12, assembled near the border town of Matamoros, Mexico. Each of them carried a unique strain of the superbug in their bloodstream, carefully calibrated to incubate without killing them immediately. They were divided into 3 smaller groups, each targeting a specific southern state: Texas, Arizona, and California. Crossing the border was the easy part. With the Biden administration's lax immigration enforcement, the team blended seamlessly into the waves of migrants moving toward the U.S. Their cover stories were prepared by deep state handlers, young mothers, workers seeking asylum, and refugees fleeing cartel violence. But beneath their disguises, they were agents of biological warfare, awaiting orders to release the superbugs into strategic locations. "We don't need to fire a single shot," the mission commander had briefed them before crossing. "Chaos will spread itself." Their entry points were precisely calculated. One group would move into San Diego, another into Houston, and the third into Phoenix. Each team had instructions to contaminate high-traffic areas: bus terminals, homeless shelters, public schools, and hospitals. Once inside, they would begin releasing the pathogen through seemingly ordinary acts, coughing into public fountains, donating blood, or leaving contaminated objects in communal spaces. The key to their success was delayed detection. By the time the infections reached critical mass, local health departments and hospitals would already be overwhelmed. Outbreak and Confusion. Within 2 weeks of Vanguard Unit 12 crossing the southern border, strange symptoms began appearing in Phoenix's emergency rooms. The first victims, security guards from a homeless shelter, reported flu-like symptoms, followed by rapid neurological deterioration and organ failure. In Houston, a school nurse noticed clusters of children developing unexplained fevers and respiratory distress. By the time San Diego hospitals identified the outbreak, the situation was spiraling out of control. State governments scrambled to respond, but the pathogens spread too fast. Quarantine efforts failed as infected individuals fled in fear, unknowingly spreading the disease to neighboring states. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, issued conflicting statements, initially downplaying the outbreaks as seasonal anomalies. By the time the federal government declared a state of emergency, it was already too late. Deep state operatives embedded in federal agencies ensured that medical supplies were delayed, vaccines mismanaged, and critical information withheld. Pharmaceutical companies received insider tips to profit from the crisis, driving up prices for experimental treatments. Meanwhile, governors from Texas and Arizona, left in the dark about the true nature of the outbreak, appealed for federal assistance, only to be told that their states lacked the authority to manage the crisis independently. As the virus mutated and spread northward, entire cities went into lockdown. Hospitals turned patients away as ventilators and ICU beds ran out. Black market oxygen tanks became more valuable than gold. Social order began to unravel as fear gripped the nation. Armed militias patrolled the streets, convinced the outbreak was part of a government conspiracy. The betrayal. Unveiled Commander Carlos Marquez, a former military intelligence officer turned independent investigator, had been monitoring unusual activities along the southern border. Initially, he assumed the sudden influx of migrants and strange illnesses were unrelated events, until he uncovered encrypted communications between Chinese agents and deep state operatives in the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. His investigation revealed the existence of Operation Red Harvest. Carlos shared his findings with state officials, but his warnings were ignored. Deep state actors had already infiltrated key positions within law enforcement and intelligence, labeling Carlos a domestic threat. Determined to expose the truth, he turned to his old ally, Raven Eldridge, a former Nexus 1 operative who had gone underground after refusing to serve the new regime. Together, they formed a small resistance network, determined to stop the spread of the virus and reveal the perpetrators. "This isn't just an outbreak," Raven said, studying intercepted messages. "It's a controlled demolition of the country." Their first mission was to locate and neutralize the remaining members of Vanguard Unit 12. Carlos and Raven tracked one of the operatives to a shelter in Austin, Texas. But they were too late. The operative was already dead, his body showing the final stages of the infection. However, they discovered a satchel containing vials of a synthetic antidote, labeled with the seal of a Chinese pharmaceutical company tied to the operation. The Final Showdown. Carlos and Raven raced against time, knowing the antidote was the only chance to contain the outbreak. But transporting it across state lines without alerting deep state agents was a dangerous gamble. With help from sympathetic Border Patrol officers, they crossed into Phoenix, only to be ambushed by federal agents on orders from the DHS. Pinned down in a warehouse near the border, Carlos made a desperate decision. "You get the antidote out," he told Raven. "I'll hold them off." Raven hesitated, but Carlos's expression left no room for argument. As she slipped through a hidden exit, gunfire erupted behind her. Carlos fought until his ammunition ran out, buying Raven the precious minutes she needed to escape. With the antidote in hand, Raven reached a network of underground clinics willing to administer it covertly. Slowly, the outbreak began to subside, but the damage had already been done. Tens of thousands were dead, and the U.S. government was on the verge of collapse. Aftermath. The official narrative blamed the outbreak on migrant caravans and poor border control, concealing the true origins of the superbugs. The deep state actors behind Operation Red Harvest quietly disappeared, their wealth and power intact. China denied any involvement, while pharmaceutical companies raked in billions from the crisis. Carlos was declared missing in action, a casualty of a war most Americans would never know was fought. Raven, now living in the shadows, vowed to continue exposing the truth, knowing that the next operation was already in the making. In the end, Operation Red Harvest achieved its goal. America was left weakened, divided, and primed for the rise of a new global order, one controlled not by armies, but by those who wielded the power of life and death through science and fear. And the southern border? It remained wide open for the next storm to come.